My name is Jo Bowler. I'm a professor here at Stanford, and also one of the directors of UCubed. The other directors sitting here on the front row. The two of us are busy trying to change maths teaching. K-16, although we do a lot of work K-12, but I wanted to share with you that I released a book a couple of years ago. Has anybody read any of this book? I see show of hands, some of you. If you haven't, so this is a book for maths teachers, but the overwhelming feedback I've had from readers of this book is you have to get this out further, wider, not just to maths teachers, but to parents, to other teachers, to anybody who's involved with learning. So I took that to heart. I've been working for the last couple of years on a new book that looks something like this, and the intention of this book is to go to other subjects and other areas, but for mathematics instructors, this is really the book that I would recommend that has some of the ideas I'm talking to you about. But why are we working so hard to do all the things we're doing? This is one of the reasons, and I'm sure many of you are involved with students who are maths traumatized, have maths anxiety. Of course, it's not just the students. Many professors also have maths anxiety. It's very widespread. It's hard to put an exact figure on it. But I work with neuroscientists at Stanford, and some of the recent neuroscience is showing that people who are anxious about maths, when they see numbers, a fear center in their brain lights up that is the same fear center that lights up when we see snakes and spiders. At the same time as that fear center lights up, the problem-solving centers of the brain shut down. So when we know this is happening for so many students, it really makes sense to address this before we even get into any maths teaching. So how do we address this? I want to share 3 things that are really pivotal for students of any age and that will really change people. But I did want to say we're at a very interesting time in education. Different groups are coming together and really recognizing the need for change. And one of the groups that I work with that I wanted to share with you is the Mathematical Association of America. So they are an organization for college professors mainly, but they've released a document urging the colleges to change their teaching of mathematics. And I wanted to read for you their statement about why we need to change the teaching of mathematics. It's pretty strong. It says, because access to success, well, I'll just let you read that, I guess. You can read. That is on our website, and this is just the beginning of a really excellent document that sets out all the different teaching strategies that can be used at the college level. So I really recommend that document, and we have that on our website and at the university section of our website, as well as, of course, on the MAA's websites. But we're going to talk today about how to change people's relationships with maths, although much of what I will talk to you about applies to every subject area. And I am going to share 3 what I think of as really very important evidence that we have from neuroscience from the past 2 or 3 years. So this one turns out to be an absolutely pivotal message for students. Most students we know are sitting in classrooms at every level believing this, that you're born with a maths brain or you're not. Every time you struggle, that's a sign that you have a brain that's not really cut out for maths. So what I urge teachers to do is share with students the evidence we now have, and this is some of it. What does happen every time we learn is one of 3 things happens in the brain. One possibility is every time you learn something new, you form a new brain pathway. At first, it's a delicate little pathway, but the more you learn something, the deeper it becomes. The other possibility is you strengthen a pathway you already had. And the third possibility is that you form a connection between pathways that you had in your brain. So those 3 things are the things that happen when we learn, and they're happening all the time. Nobody's born with these pathways, but every time we work on mathematics, our brain is active in these ways. I could share with you tons of evidence of this and brain growth and brain plasticity. I'll share just one with you. This was a study done in Stanford's neurolabs where they brought in kids half of whom had been diagnosed as having a learning disability in mathematics. They looked at their brains while they worked on maths, and they saw actual brain differences. The brain differences were that the students identified as being learning disabled had more of their brains lighting up when they worked on a maths problem. They worked with both groups for 8 weeks, and at the end of that 8-week period, not only did both sets of students have the same achievement, but they had the exact same brain activity. So this is one of numerous studies that show that usually an 8-week period of time can cause the brain to completely rewire and change. And if you want to read any more of these cases of change, I recommend all of these books. They're pretty amazing. But I wanted to underscore the point that really anybody can pursue mathematics and STEM, other STEM subjects, to any level they want to. And I want to show you a couple of cases of this. Dylan Lin, the woman on the right, happy International Women's Day, by the way, everybody. Woman on the right is Dylan Lin. She was diagnosed as having dyscalculia, which is a particular mathematics learning disability, but she really wanted to graduate from Berkeley with a degree in maths, which she did, despite all the faculty telling her to change her major. She pursued and is now writing up her experience of how she was able to be successful in maths by forming her own ways of working. Nicholas Letchford is maybe even more stunning, really. He grew up in Australia. In the first years of school, his teachers said he was he had a very low IQ, he was learning disabled. At the first parents' evening, his parents were told that he was the worst child they'd seen in 20 years. Because he couldn't function at the school. Anyway, his mother just wrote this book called Reversed, a memoir about Nicholas, who graduated this past summer with a doctorate in applied mathematics from Oxford University. So we have this more and more evidence, really, that it doesn't, even people who start with really severe disadvantages can go to any level they want to in mathematics with the right support and teaching. So trying to change people's ideas about kids, even kids diagnosed with special educational needs. We just launched a new section of our website sharing with people how all these cases of people even with special needs who went on to do amazing things, what they were doing. I also wrote a little short article that appeared on Time magazine last week. In fact, it was so popular, it was on their website surrounded by these articles. So it looks a little out of place there, I think, but there it was, surrounded by Donald Trump. But so what happens? What has happened for these people that they can start life with such disadvantages and go on to amazing things? We know it has a lot to do with this, that what you believe about yourself actually will change your brain, change your outcomes. This is one of Carol's data graphs showing kids with a growth and a fixed mindset going through 7th and 8th grade in maths. The kids who believe their intelligence was fixed are the ones on this low-level line. The kids who thought they could learn anything, they had the same teachers, the same experiences, but you can see it really matters and really changes kids' outcomes. So how do we have so many kids in our system with a fixed mindset, particularly in maths? Well, it turns out these little words are rather damaging. They do lead to fixed mindsets. When we praise kids and tell them they're smart, what they hear is, oh, great, I'm smart. But then later when they mess up on something, they think, I'm not so smart. And they evaluate themselves against this fixed idea. These ideas are based on old, outdated ideas, pre-neuroscience. They are what keep girls and women out of STEM pathways. And the reason it's so damaging, even if you're the one being praised for being gifted or smart, is if you believe that about yourself and that you have this fixed brain, but then later you mess up on something or struggle, that struggle becomes really devastating. And I wanted to tell you about a couple of cases from Stanford. One, I was sharing this evidence with my teacher students in the summer, and one of the young women said to me, oh my gosh, you're describing my life. She said, I grew up, everybody said you have a math brain. She said I was in a gifted program. I believed I had a maths brain. I enrolled at UCLA as a maths major, and in the second year of the program, I really struggled with one of my courses. So I thought, I don't have a math brain, and I dropped out of my math major. So this is the damage of this fixed thinking for people. And to really show you, not only is this fixed thinking damaging, but it's very gendered and racialized. And I wanted to show you some evidence of that. So this group of researchers asked a great question. They went into colleges and asked professors how much they thought people needed a gift to be successful. And this fantastic research was published in Science, which is really the most difficult journal probably to get into. And that is because they found very strong evidence that the more any academic field values the idea of needing a gift, the fewer women and the fewer African American students were in that field. And that held across all 30 subjects they looked at. These were their results. On the x-axis was how much professors believed that you had to be gifted to be successful. On the y-axis, these graphs show the proportion of women in the field. You can see pretty clearly there, I think, the top graphs are STEM, the lower graphs, humanities, that maths is right out there on the STEM graphs. More maths professors believe you have to have a gift in order to be successful. Who in here is teaching maths? Could I see a show of hands? Interestingly, in the humanities, you see the philosophy professors are also way out there. You have to be born with a philosophy brain to be successful, it turns out. The educators don't believe that. Yay for educators. And interestingly also, if you look at the STEM graph, you'll see the neuroscientists also do not believe you have to have a gift. They know really there is no such thing. So interesting, but we're up against cultural beliefs that certain kids have this special, different brain and certain kids don't. And just to show you how deeply rooted those cultural ideas are, guess what? Guess is the most commonly Googled word that comes after "is my 2-year-old son." Any ideas? You got it. Gifted is the right answer, and that is Googled 2.5 more times than "is my daughter gifted?" So this is where you start to see how these ideas of having talent, gift, whatever you want to call those fixed ideas, are really attributed to some people in our population and not others. And that's really, really difficult. And so I always wonder why we have these dichotomous ideas about people being smart or not, or gifted or not. And we know now that actually everybody is on a growth journey. There is no cutoff where somebody has the right kind of brain and somebody doesn't. Looks like the second bus is coming in. So just to, I wanted to share with you more on my Stanford students. I made a film recently that I thought I'd share with you. And I was prompted to make this film because I had received an email from a filmmaker. And the email said that they had made a film about giftedness and wanted to consider giftedness from a social justice perspective. And I thought that sounds interesting. I'll look at their trailer, and their trailer was about broadening the number of the kids who are identified as gifted. So I understand why they might want to do that, but I thought, I'm not sure that's what we really want to be doing, so we decided to make our own film. So this is the film I'm going to share with you. I have been teaching undergrads at Stanford for many years, and I've talked to many undergrads about the labels they've received, and so I asked some of them on film about those labels and ideas, and you'll hear from them. At the end of the film, we decided to bring in some 4th grade students, and the 4th grade students attend a school where none of them are told they're gifted or smart. They're just given brain growth messages, and you'll see some of the differences. So when this film finishes, I'd like you to just chat a little with people around you about any issues this raises for you, maybe as a learner, maybe as a teacher of learners, and what these ideas are doing to students in our system.
Hi, I'm Alan.
Alan, tell me a bit about your experience of being labeled as smart or gifted.
Yeah, I was labeled as gifted in elementary school, actually. I was tested in kindergarten, and some force deemed that I was worthy of some special attention.
We took a weird test that was nothing like I'd ever done before, and then after that, some of the kids that took the test were pulled out of class to go to a special class.
I grew up in Senegal, West Africa, and I was labeled as gifted because from a grade standpoint, I was always in the top 5%.
At first, it made me feel very validated. It made me feel like I was special.
Being gifted to me meant that it just was something that was in me already. It was not something I could work at, but it was something that came from within me and had been identified by this test when I was 7.
My expectation to myself was that I was supposed to always know everything and always be the top of everything, because gifted people are supposed to be invincible.
As someone who was a top student and who was smart, I needed to be doing everything all the time, so there was no room for mistakes.
I usually made it seem like I wasn't struggling, which resulted in me struggling more because I wouldn't ask for help.
I wasn't supposed to ask questions because I was already supposed to know how to do everything. And people would come to me, but I couldn't go to anyone else if I needed help.
I would actively try to show people I wasn't spending much time doing work to make it seem like it was effortless for me.
Well, the first time I really struggled with something was memorizing my times tables. And that made me feel terrible. And my mom would talk to the teacher, and everyone was freaking out that I couldn't do something. And struggling meant that maybe it was running out. Maybe I was getting towards the end of that thing that was within me and I couldn't go any further, so it was really scary.
When I had to actually learn to do something or try hard in something, I would just turn away from it completely.
It's like I don't want people to find out that I'm not what they thought I was.
As soon as I slipped up, as soon as I made a small mistake, the kind of feeling that came around was that I wasn't gifted. I am not a gifted individual when it comes to mathematics.
I questioned very much if I was meant to study engineering because I wasn't the best person in my math or chemistry classes.
Being labeled as gifted based on my grades made grades the most valuable assets I had, and when they were not up to par, I started really doubting who I was and questioning myself, and my idea of self was really deflated.
Being one of the few Latina students in the school, I felt this additional pressure because I was there to represent my people. I had to make this choice of being in a space where I was this gifted person, but then I couldn't be myself and be my full self.
Hi, my name is Nava and I am 9 years old.
How would you feel if somebody told you that you were gifted?
I would feel great.
How would you feel if your friends were told they were gifted, but you weren't?
Then I would kind of feel bad because they're telling all my other friends that they're gifted, but not me.
My name is Jude and I am 10 years old.
Hi Jude. When people say that somebody's smart, what do you think that means?
Well, if you say someone's smart, it's like, oh, they're smart and the other person is not.
What do you think about that?
I don't think that's very fair to label someone. Either tell everybody, oh, you're a regular kid, or tell everybody you're gifted. The same to one kid, oh, you're a gifted kid. No, you're not. Can either drop their self-esteem or have it rise really fast.
If you're separating kids, one, they could work well together and they could collaborate, and two, if there's this group of kids who are supposedly not gifted, what if they are? What if they can do something amazing and help the supposedly gifted kids?
I think if I grew up in a world where no one was labeled as gifted, I would have asked a lot more questions.
You can try as much as you want, and your brain will grow even if you get the answer fully wrong.
So, how did it feel to know you can learn anything?
Great, because I had felt before that I could only learn limited things, but now I kind of felt like I just wanted to grab a giant book and just read until I learned everything I could.
How do I feel knowing that I can learn anything? Anything.
take a moment to either talk to somebody around you if you want to, or just process a little bit in that, and then we're going to chat together about anything that you think is raised in that movie, in that film. I'm going to ask you to wrap up your conversation. Is that on? If I could, I know that was just a short little bit of time to discuss, because I know our time's short today. But would anybody like to share anything that film raises for you or students in your context? Yes.
I'm going to quote some wisdom from Pixar's Incredibles.
Oh, yeah, please do. You have a mic.
In the first movie says, well, if everybody's special, then nobody's special. I think what's important to draw a distinction, I think, is that certain people are gifted, not in an infinite sense, but in a sense of saying, hey, your aptitude and interest right now at this stage is high, and therefore I need to meet your intrinsic motivation and interest in this topic to keep it going. It doesn't necessarily mean that you'll always be that across all subjects or things of that nature.
So
but I know as a parent, I don't use gifted. I just say, hey, you're demonstrating a talent. I have a daughter in 6th grade who skipped 2nd grade because they found that she was just eating everything up very quickly. But I didn't call her gifted. I just said, right now her motor is high, and it's up to you, the teacher, to keep her hungry, not lower it down that it doesn't seem.
And I think what you're describing, I would describe as being high achieving or highly motivated. Of course, students are different in our system, and as to how highly achieving they are, or even how motivated they are. The problems come about when we attach to that a name that is very fixed. And as some of the students in the video reflected, I felt like it was something that was in me that I couldn't change. And it leads to a whole cascade of issues for people who get that label and people who don't. California does not have a requirement for gifted programs. Most states across the country do. Any other thoughts? Any other things that came up for people? Yeah.
Ability to really learn, because you have to be comfortable with failure before you can ever really start succeeding. And so that needs to be part of the game, is to understand that failure is just perfectly normal.
Yeah, I'm glad you raised that, because that is the most important part and the most important problem with this label. The students who are given the label become averse to failure and to struggle, and that is very threatening to them. So I think that's part of what we're questioning. Why would we give people these ideas about themselves that make them unwilling to struggle? So that's a perfect segue to talking about this next area of brain science, which, again, I won't give you all the evidence on this, but it's certainly very clear that at the times when we're struggling, even making mistakes, are the very best times for our brains. I mentioned this book earlier. This author decides to look at the highest achievement in all these different areas, and he goes to places where people are displaying the highest achievement and finds for nobody it was something that they were born with, but instead he identifies a very particular kind of practice, and he describes that everybody who's very high achieving is engaged in. And the practice he describes is pushing at the edge of your understanding, making mistakes, correcting them, going on, but always being at that edge. One of the problems in our school system is when we make classes pretty comfortable for kids, so they're just getting answers right. And actually, that's not very good for their brains. It's not what we really want. And when we're struggling and making mistakes, it's very clear from neuroscience that those are the best times for our brains. And we have found in our work with students that when we share with them that mistakes are great, we want you to make mistakes, that's a really positive sign, we want you to struggle, that is a really liberating message for them, because many kids, particularly when they get to you, have grown up in systems where mistakes have been punished, and they have got the idea that they're not meant to make mistakes, they're not really meant to struggle even. So It's a really liberating message. And just to show you how important it is, this was a study that looked at people's brains when they made mistakes. And what they found was that people with a growth mindset, when they made a mistake, their brains were much more active or on fire with growth compared to people with a fixed mindset. So this was some very clear evidence that what you believe about yourself will change how your brain operates. Starts to help us make sense of that graph I showed you earlier of kids with a growth mindset always going onwards and upwards. Their brains are more active and are growing more when they make mistakes than other kids. So just to underscore again the importance of changing kids' mindsets, which you can do at any age. That's the good news about mindsets. So the third area I want to talk to you about is the importance of seeing maths differently. And many of us are maths teachers here, I believe, and really interesting neuroscience about the power of our brains and how our brains want to think about mathematics. This comes from Stanford also. The neuroscientists now know that every time you work on a maths problem, 5 different areas of the brain light up. 5 pathways, 2 of them are visual pathways. So actually thinking visually about maths is really important. It's what our brain wants to do. And we're very fortunate, those of us who teach maths, because you can engage people with maths in all of these different ways. They can talk about it and write about it. They can use numbers, of course, but also words, pictures, graphs, algorithms. They can build models. They can move with mathematics. And all of these different mathematical ways of working are really important. So I'm going to ask you to look at a maths problem now. I don't think we need these. I'm going to ask you just to look at a maths problem for a few minutes so we can think about what it means to think visually. And I'm going to show you a problem that probably in your lifetime you've looked at problems like this with numbers. So I want you to do something that's hard for maths teachers, which is to not think about numbers, but instead to think visually. So this is what the problem looks like. And my question for you, and I want you to think about this at first on your own, and then maybe we'll talk a bit, but first on your own, I'd like you to think, here we have 3 cases of squares, and in case 2, there are more squares than in case 1. And in case 3, there are more squares. My question is, where are the extra squares? So think about that on your own for a minute. A bit of visual, get the visual parts of your brain active. And then we'll talk about what it means and why I'm showing you this. When you've seen where you think some extra squares are, if you're sitting with others, feel free to tell each other where you see the extra squares, and then I'll show you some things. So I'm sorry again to interrupt you after a short little moment, but I'd like to show you some things about this problem. I've given this problem now out to lots of different people, undergrads at Stanford, company directors, little children. And what's amazing about it is people see it really differently. And I want to show you some different ways people see it, and I'll find out how you saw it. So I asked people not only to show me visually, but also to describe what they see. And it was my undergrads at Stanford that described this method as the raindrop method. Who saw it in that way? Individual, like drops of rain coming down. It was also my undergrads who described this method as the bowling alley method. They said it's like a row of Skittles coming in the bowling alley. Who saw it in that bowling alley way? Completely different to the first way. It was a teacher who said to me that this was like a volcano, the volcano method, like a volcano erupts and the lava follows the eruption, kind of center leading way. Did anybody see it in that volcano way? Another teacher described this as the parting of the Red Sea. This is the shape comes apart and a new center comes in. Did anybody see it in this way? Some people see a growth of triangles. Others see the triangles that could be built on the sides, what we might think of as the negative space in mathematics. We get cultural differences when we go around the country doing this activity. This next method came from teachers in Boston who said they saw the like when the snow melts and the buildings emerge out of the snow. So we think of that as the snow method. And then one of the young men at Stanford this past summer told me he saw the Minecraft tree. And this is how he saw the growth. Did anybody see it in this way? Sideways. And then this method, I don't know, if you look at the red square and move the square or squares each time, you see the shape grows as a square. Did anybody see it in that way? So this is what I want to illustrate to you with this problem. When it's given out in maths classrooms, it's given out with the number question, how many. And people are asked, how many are in the 10th case or how many are in the nth case? And what happens is people count and they draw up a table like this, and then they're expected to stare down this column of numbers until they notice that you can add one to the number of squares and square it, and you'll get the total number of squares. And I actually gave this out in a room full of teachers a while back, and one table of teachers, they were high school teachers, they didn't listen to my request to think visually about this task, and they drew up a table of numbers like this, and they filled it all out, and they called me over, and they said, we're finished. It's n plus 1 squared. And I said, okay, why do you think it's squared? Where does that squared exponent come from? And they said, no idea. So this is why we see that square. In fact, the shape grows as a square. And in the first case, it's a 2 by 2 square. And in the second, it's a 3 by 3 square, which gives us the case number plus 1 squared. And in fact, I could have asked all of the different ways you saw this visually. I could have asked you to describe it algebraically, and we would have had a whole room full of algebraic expressions, which would all be equivalent to each other. So when we do this task with students, we completely change the nature of the task just by asking the question, how do you see it? Instead of there being one way, one table to fill out, one set of numbers to stare at, the students they have these really great conversations about the function. Our 5th graders that we did this task with could tell me why it was n plus 1 squared. The high school teachers couldn't because they'd just move numbers around. So at UCubed, we are all about making maths visual, respecting different ways of seeing things mathematically. Turns out to be really important for people. And there was an interesting article that I thought you'd be interested in on this, this notion of genius and giftedness. Terrible title, but the people are fascinated by what makes people high achieving. They have Einstein's brain sliced up in a museum, and people have stared at it, and they don't see anything special about it. So now they've brought in living people who are alive and looked at their brains to see what is different about people they regard as trailblazers. And this is what they find: more communication going on between different areas of the brain, more flexibility in thinking. Again, speaking to these distributed networks in the brain, all the neuroscience is showing this, that flexible thought, distributed thinking comes from seeing maths in different ways. So let me just, if I can get my cursor to come back cursor. Let me show you this. In schools, which I know you're at a higher age level, but in schools, kids can go down really different pathways with mathematics. And this was a really interesting study that looked at the difference between high and low achieving kids and saw that when you gave them number problems, they actually engaged completely differently in maths, with the high achievers engaging with numbers flexibly and the low achieving kids trying to memorize methods. This was the amount of difference between the kids in this study, and what I would really point to here is the above average kids using number sense, being flexible with numbers, and the below average kids holding on to counting methods that they believe that they have to use. So number flexibility is really important for everybody. We teach number flexibility in my online classes. It's on UCubed. It's number talks. I love I don't know if any of you, does anyone here do number talks? Yay. Love number talks. It's when you just give give a number problem, and you could do it with any problem and any level of maths. And then you ask people to share their different ways of doing it, and you record them. And so people start to see, when I do these with kids, they are completely mind blown that you can solve 18 times 5 in more than one way. So the shift that it helps kids make, that just knowing that there are all these different ways. And it was interesting, I taught number talks in my online class. And after that online class came out a few summers ago, I got a call from a teacher in England who said, oh, I love number talks. I went and did one with my top set, that's like the top track. And we had this great discussion about 18 times 5, and we talked about all the different ways you can see it and solve it. And then I went to my bottom set kids, and I gave them 18 times 5, and there was silence in the whole room. And he said, I waited, and I said, come on, what about if you do 20 times 5 instead? And he said, the kids looked at me, and they said, but sir, we didn't think that was allowed. And so this is, again, what they found in that study. Low-achieving kids have got the idea that you can't be flexible with numbers. When I shared these as well in my books that I've written, I've had adults come up to me and say, I saw those ways of doing 18 times 5, and it's not that I didn't know you could do that with numbers. I just didn't think it was allowed. So my question to teachers always is, what are we doing in our system that so many people think you cannot be flexible with numbers? It's pretty awful. So I know we're short of time. I want to skip to a couple of things. So speed. Flexible thinking is very important. Speed is the enemy of flexible thinking. Unfortunately, very often mathematics is presented to students in a way that they think they just have to work quickly. And kids who think that you have to be fast to be good at maths, that's a huge barrier to them going forward. And this Time article I wrote a few years ago after conversations, essays my Stanford students wrote, but if you're somebody who lectures in maths, I should tell you this, that lecturers typically speak at between 100 and 125 words a minute, but people can only take note of about 20 words a minute. So when students think that their goal, and I can tell you many Stanford students think that is their goal, to sit in a lecture and write down, then, it's really going nowhere for them. So lots of things about changing that. But I'm going to assume many of you know this study, but I'm going to share it anyway because it's just so important. Uri Treisman was a mathematician at Berkeley. He's now at UT Austin. When he was at Berkeley, he noticed this: 60% of African American students were failing calculus compared to 0% of Chinese American students. So he at first asked the faculty, what do you think is the difference? Why is this apparent cultural difference? The faculty came up with a whole lot of reasons. They were all incorrect. They said it's their incoming scores, it's their maths background. It wasn't any of those things. There was one difference between the two cultural groups, and the difference was the African American students worked alone. The Chinese American students did maths together in the dormitories, in the eating halls. So Uri Treisman all he did was make workshops where he invited the students to come and do maths together, and within 2 years, the failure rate of the students in calculus had dropped to 0. So just organizing students to do maths in groups turns out to be really important. One of the reasons that's so important is what they found was for the African American students, they were often going to their room to work on maths problems, finding that they were struggling and thinking, oh, I'm not a math person, and just dropping out of math, rather than, when you work together with lots of people, of course, you find that everybody struggles. So I did want to tell you, I've been teaching a class at Stanford for the last few years. It's called How to Learn Maths. In that class, we do maths together, and I share these brain and mindset messages. It was in education, then the engineers said, please teach it inside engineering. We have so many students who take their first math class and decide they can't be an engineer, they need you. Then the maths department at Stanford wanted to cross-list the course. That's kind of a big deal at Stanford. But anyway, I wanted to share with you that I have a really mixed range of students in this class. I have students who are maths majors, and I have students who are maths traumatized completely. And we work on maths in a different way together. This student I want to read for you, when she wrote her final reflection in my class, the Hettinger report published it in full because they were so moved by it. This is from her final reflection. She said, "For much of my life, math has been my ultimate nemesis, my least favorite class, my lowest test scores, my most groan-inducing homework. Math appeared to me as the enemy of creativity and social interaction and the refuge of rule-loving, closed-minded people." Many people have this belief, of course, and we probably know why when we step inside high schools, but to undo their views about maths, we engage in maths differently. And I can only say that this experience is extremely liberating for the students who take the class. I'm going to show you a couple of evaluations from the students at the end. I always doubted my ability to succeed as an engineer because I didn't do well at math instantly. That's the speed question. In this class, I learned about creativity and collaboration. I've seen a lot of improvements in my grades. And then this one has to be my favorite from last year. Math used to stay on the page, at least for me, since I've started this class. Problems have found their way into three-dimensional space. The walls of my room, the back of the name tag you asked me to make. For non-STEM classes, squares, diagrams, excitement converge in the brain space I'd reserved for calculations. So this has been going so well that I was asked this a few months ago if I would teach a new maths class to incoming freshmen at Stanford. They're a group of freshmen that have been identified as being kind of vulnerable in some way. So it's students who enter into our Leyland Scholars Program for first-gen students, but also the engineers look at the applications of students, and they look at some that they would think are somewhat vulnerable, and they invite them to a summer program. So this summer, I'm actually getting 100 undergrads, and we're going to do maths together, and it's going to be a calculus class, but I know that some of the students will come in having done calculus, AP Calc even. Some of them will have gone nowhere near calculus. And what we've decided to do this summer is I recently read this book, and it's one of the most beautiful books I've ever read. It's not out yet. I was given it because Steve asked me to write a blurb for it, but it comes out on April 2nd, I think, so just a few weeks. But what happens in this book is Steve basically says, why is calculus important? What is it? How does it underpin things in the world? What's its history? And as he says in the book, you can take a calculus class and not get any of this. So each chapter focuses on the big idea in calculus, and we're going to make each section of our course be about those big ideas. We're going to do big exploratory activities that help the students get those really big ideas. And my hope is that this will frame for them a mathematics journey so that when they go into the math department and get tons of methods, they'll be able to make sense of them under this sort of umbrella of the big ideas. So I'm excited for that. That's happening this summer. Other things you might be interested in, we have tons of tasks on our website, K16. This year, every year, we release what we call a week of inspirational maths, open, engaging, creative maths tasks. This past summer, we had a community college section of those tasks, the first time we've done that. So lots of really nice tasks to look at. And we're teaching algebra. Oh no, where's my algebra piece? We also have here's the algebra. 4 weeks of introduction to algebra, free on the website, Algebra for Anybody. It's visual, creative, based around those big ideas. So lots of resources on our website. This is a free student online class that completely changes students' outlooks on maths and mindset. Has been shown that students who take it do better. Even a year later, that's free little 6-session class on our website. And then I guess we have a teaching guide. We have all sorts of different things. But I could finish by sharing with you data on why we need to change maths. And of course, there was lots of data I could share with you. But instead, I just want to play for you a little video to illustrate the need to change maths. It's a video that a high school student made and put on YouTube. And I think this kind of says it all.
Since our first equation tells us that y equals 3x plus 2, this means that we can substitute a 3x plus 2 in for the y in our second equation. In other words, since y means the same thing as 3x plus 2, we can replace the y in the second equation with the 3x plus 2. And rewriting our second equation, we now have 7x minus 4 times parentheses 3x plus 2.
Did any of you recognize these meerkats? Anyway, the new book is coming out in September. It offers a different approach to not just maths, really, but life, and what happens when we take on these different approaches. UCubed is our website. If you'd like to come and see any more of the ideas I've shared with you, we were really pleased a couple of years ago when 5,000 people came to the site, and now we're over 31 million visits. So it's going well. People are excited about this new approach to maths. And I believe we have a few minutes for questions if anybody would like to ask a question. Yes.
Maybe just a couple things to start to push this over to a chemistry class, for example, a first semester general organic biochemistry for health science majors.
Yes. Well, I do think that we have to start. I'm not sure if you're on the bus that came in late. Were you? But I do think we have to start with all classes with sharing the brain evidence with students and telling them, you know, that these ideas that you can do chemistry or you can't, you can do maths or you can't, are faulty. And we have a lot now. I was showing these books of incredible evidence that people can really learn anything. So that would be my start to any class. And then the multidimensional ways of working that the neurosciences is showing us, of course, apply to every subject area. And in the new book, I've really, maths is my passion and what I love, but in the new book I stretched myself to think about this in all subject areas and to think about what it means to take a multidimensional approach to anything, really. So we look at things differently. You can show a cell diagram to people and ask them, what do you see? And have a discussion with people. It's not just a maths problem you can do that with. So I think the multidimensional approach is the future, really. Yes? Yeah. Yeah.
You might say to college students or even young children.
Yeah. So when we taught, we did a big teaching intervention last summer or a few summers ago. So, and first of all, we said to the students, we told them all the things I've told you. Brains grow and change. There's no such thing as a math person, all that. But then we said to them, struggle is really good, really important. We're going to give you really challenging problems. We want you to struggle. And we want you to make mistakes. And that was kind of liberating for them. And they certainly talked about how liberating that was for them. But there'd be moments when they'd say to us things like, oh, this is so hard. And we would say, that is fantastic. That is the feeling of your brain growing. That's why it feels hard, is because your brain is literally growing in these moments. And you want that. You want that feeling. And so they were like, oh, okay. And they would dive back into things and really keep going. So I do believe a lot in this message to kids that struggle is really good and really important, and we want them doing that. Most kids who feel bad about themselves have gone through their life feeling bad every time they struggle, and so if you can just change how they feel about that, it's really a huge piece for them. Other questions? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Because you're on a schedule of getting through things. Mm-hmm. 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 Mm. That's well, I'm sad to hear that because it's really a great way to teach. And I don't know what gives the time pressure that there's so much to get through. I mean, that's the problem of high school too, that kids never stop to have discussions or think deeply because of time. And it's also the problem at Stanford. So we have to somehow release people of this feeling that I have no time to stop and hear about different approaches or to have a discussion about those, because it turns out to be so important. What I didn't share with you, just because we were short of time, is we taught kids in this way in a middle school. Now, these are different age to your kids, but we taught them for 18 lessons, and we did take the time to go into depth and hear different methods. And these were their scores for when they came to us. There were 84 students. This was a test they took before they came to us, and they were with us for 18 lessons, and we gave them that test again. And they increased by an average of 50% per student, which is equivalent to 2.7 years of school. And the hallmark of what we did with those kids was we stopped and we discussed different ideas, different methods. So what you're saying is hard because you don't have time for, makes me think that structural changes need to happen so people feel more time to do that because it's so important. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, I mean, we have many schools now who have shifted, and we have great evidence of what it's done for their kids in terms of their achievement and their outcomes. So it is happening here in the US, but it's also much more prevalent in some countries. Some countries are even, those countries we think of as being very procedural and memory-based, like China or Japan, actually have fewer kids who think maths is about memorization than the US does. And they go deeper on ideas. We were in China recently, and we went to many high school lessons. And in none of the lessons did we see more than 3 questions be answered by the students. But they went into such depth on the questions. It was nothing like you would see in a US high school. So I think the US is one of the most shallow, fast coverage countries in mathematics, sadly. But we are seeing a lot of places that are changing, which is really great. How are we doing on time? 3:15. Yes. What time did we finish? Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Right. I mean, I don't know how possible it is, but the type of class I teach here, and we talk with those middle school students I just saw, where we engage in problems more deeply and creatively, and we have a lot of mindset messages. Could there not be a class like that, even if it's an intro class for kids where they get that different maths experience to set them off? Because I hear that it's different to put into classes, but how about having, do you have one? Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm. 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 Right. And do community colleges, do you have to cover stuff for the state standards? It's like high school? The CID. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Yeah. I mean, I do think we need to change the standards. That would be a great start. Sorry? Uh-huh. Right. The trouble is, the students come to you having had this such a shallow procedural maths experience that they're turned off maths. And we can change that for students, but not by giving them more of a shallow math procedural experience that keeps them stuck in it. So, yeah, we need. Yeah. Right. Well, and really great if that's a maths course as well. Mindset and maths together. Yeah. Mindset and maths together. A course where kids see maths differently and start to develop a different relationship with maths. Because I know, and you know probably too, that we pretty much need to start with math therapy for people when they come out of school. And if you don't start with that therapy piece, it's not going to, they're not going to be have a good experience. So, yeah. Brain growth? Yeah. These. Yeah. Yes. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Thank you. I am speaking at the, is it C Cubed? Is that what it's called? CMC Cubed, in Monterey in December for the community college conference. Anyone wants to come? Oh, yes, you were next, yeah. Oh, great. Mm-hmm. 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 Great. Uh-huh. Great. Yeah, right. Huh. Where are you? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's fantastic. Oh, thank you. Great. That's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. And we have found that with some of the most resistant teachers. And when Kathy was in charge of maths in a school district, I was working with her teachers with her. And I remember these teachers had to come and work with us. We had a teacher who was 1 year from retirement, had taught for 35 years, the same way his whole life, not interested at all. And by halfway through our sessions, he turned up so excited. He'd spent the whole weekend making a life-size graph out of tarpaulin with his wife that the kids could walk around on, and put back his retirement and decided to keep teaching. So we find this, that actually some of the most resistant people turn out to be the greatest advocates over time. It's really interesting. Yeah.
Hi, Joe. I attended the 2018 STEM Core Symposium, and at the conclusion of that, you talked about, I think it was some course modules offered by Stanford that were free and accessible to the public. Are those still available?
The online classes, yes.
Yeah, perhaps you could reference those
yes,
as well.
And there's 2 teacher classes and 1 student class. So this is the student class. And yeah, when we study this, we find it really shifts people's mindsets and people's approach to maths. It's me plus undergrads at Stanford teaching it and taking people on a different kind of maths journey. So I think, is that what you mean? Mm-hmm. And this is also available with Spanish subtitles. I can show you right now. Let's go to YouCubed and I'll show you what it is. So there's my Amazon order. So this is our website. And then courses is where the online student class is there. And this is where the tasks are. The algebra I showed you is here, Mathematical Mindset Algebra. Tasks, just lots and lots of tasks are here, as you can see. And you can choose. We only have down to 12 on our list. We need to change that. But the week of inspirational math this past year, which is a set of tasks, you see here, for the first time, we put in a set of community college tasks. So these are nice, open, visual, creative, different tasks. But, oh, and the other thing you might be interested in is under the ID impact, we have YouCube U, which is my students wanted to make this about university maths. And there, this is the MAA guide I quoted from. Steve Strogatz, this is a video of him teaching in his undergrad class. We haven't got a lot on here yet. We need to get more. But, yeah. And this is, you know, if you happen to speak Portuguese, you can click this button at the top and get the whole website in Portuguese. This is because we're doing a lot of work in Brazil. Any other questions? Oh, I guess we're over time. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Joe.